All right. Well, let's begin. In this lecture, I want to talk about Livewire, which is the Livewire is a library that you can add to Laravel, which allows you to write interactive applications that feel like a JavaScript application, but you don't necessarily have to write JavaScript, or at least not too much JavaScript, but instead you get to write in PHP and still have some interactivity that is appealing to a lot of users, that make a application feel smooth and so on. So Livewire is that library for Laravel. So what I want to do is just do a basic introduction to Livewire, a little bit of an overview, just try a couple things, and then in a subsequent lecture, we'll actually dig in and use it inside the application we've been building along the Friends application. So let's go ahead and dive in and look at what we have so far. If you remember, we have our Friends app, but like I said before, we'll add live view to this in another lecture, but for now, let's just see what we can do with Livewire for now, just messing around with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually I still want to install Livewire. So in order to do that, you just simply run the composer command, require livewire/livewire, and that will get it installed onto your system. And that'll take a few minutes to run, especially if you're running it for the first time, it'll take a few minutes. But for me, since I've already installed it, it should just take less than a minute. And so it's just kind of checking to make sure I have everything, seeing if there's any new versions. And it'll eventually get going here. I guess it also depends on your internet connection, which I have a pretty good one. So I'm not sure. It is taking time to checking the dependencies to make sure they're updated. So it looks like I am now fully updated. And so once I'm inside my Laravel application, so make sure I happen to be inside my friends one. So make sure the next command you run, which is a Livewire generator, make sure you are inside your application. So I'm inside of friends right now, as you can see, and I'm going to run a generator. So that Livewire installation gave me this generator. If I didn't install it first, I would not have the generator. So now I'm able to run an artisan command, make Livewire. And what that will do is allow you to create a component here. Now the name of the component could be anything you want right here, right? Hello, or my first component. This is the part where you name the component that's specific to the need or the usage that it'll have in your application. So this one's going to just be a playground because we just want to mess around with it and get familiar with how Livewire works. So I'm just going to create a Livewire component called playground. And it's going to ask you, will you please go to my GitHub page and star it? And I just hit enter there. I'll probably start some other day. Okay, so what that did is it generated a class file under a directory called Livewire, and it created a view file under the resources views Livewire directory. So they're both called playground. One's a blade because that's the view, and the other one's a class. And so I'll show you in a second what that looks like. Well, in fact, no, let's look at it now. Let's go ahead and take a look at what those look like. So here's under app, there's a Livewire and then a class. And so if you look at it, we use the Livewire component, and then we actually generates a class called Playground, which extends, which in PHP means inherits from. So it's inheriting a bunch of functionality from this Livewire component. And then there's this render function, which says, go render this view, which is Livewire Playground. So for now, this class is very simple, but we're going to be adding some functionality to it here in a minute to showcase what it can do. And this is also really important that in this spot, we get to leverage the object-oriented skills that we have. So like instance properties, instance methods, which allow us to update our instance variables. That's all going to come into play here. So it's going to be super, super valuable to bring in some of those object-oriented skills that we have from before. So then real quickly, this Livewire Playground, let's go look at that view. So down here we have a Livewire Playground blade file, and there's really nothing in it. So there's nothing in here yet, but we will definitely be coming back and populating this. So the next thing I want to do is, typically when you generate a Livewire component, you embed it inside an existing view. So notice all our friend views over here, create, edit, index. Typically I would embed it in there. So we're not going to do that in this lecture, but we will in an up and coming one. So hold on tight for that. So for now, we're actually going to create a route that loads this component. Again, depending on your situation, you may not have a route go directly to a Livewire component. It's just in this circumstance, it's going to be easier to lecture about it if we do so. So what I'm going to do is go to web.php and create a route for it. And so that looks like this. Route Livewire. I'm going to have a route to the playground. And then this second part is it's going to use the component that references playground. So the first one is the actual, what you would type in the URL. And the second one is the name of your component that was generated. Remember when I generated it from the command line? So, and I need to spell things correctly too. Livewire. So this will generate a route to my component. I'm not sure that's going to do much yet, but let's try. So I have a live playground. And the only reason why this shows up is I created a layout. So one thing that Livewire assumes that you have is it assumes you have a layout under views, that you create a directory called layouts, and that you have a file called app.blade.php. Now, if you don't have that, the component won't load. So very, very important thing that you do if you're setting up a standalone component that you're going to route to, you absolutely must create a layouts folder under views and then create a file specifically called app.blade.php. If you don't, then it won't work. So let me go ahead and open this file. And it's just a layout file with where it yields the content right there. And so we've seen those before in our other applications where we can share this layout, share styles, etc. But I want to point you to two very, very important lines. Okay, one is on line 5. It says Livewire styles. And what that does is Livewire has its own cascading style sheet styles it brings in. So that's going to go up there, up in the head. And the second one is Livewire scripts. So that just goes, and that's the last line of your body element. So Livewire / scripts. And so that's going to provide all the interactive functionality you're going to need for your application. So that's also very, very important. And so with that being said, let's view source on this page so we can see what actually is happening. So here's what's getting embedded up at the top. So those are our styles. And at the bottom, the Livewire scripts brings in all of this down here. So it brings in a livewire.js and also sets up another script tag, which gets things, the whole Livewire system initialized for us. So that's why it's important that you need those specific tags in your layout, because then you can leverage and take advantage of all the whole library stuff. Okay, so again, nothing is in here. So let me go back to my blade file and actually show, I guess, that this is working. Refresh. So there's my template code. It is working. So that's looking good. So let's go back here and start messing around with some other things we can do. So what I want to now showcase is that the class is actually where your, what's called your state, and state of the application, or the state of this component. And what state means is your data that your component will keep track of while your program is running. And so what's cool in Livewire is that your state is simply your instance properties that you define on the class. So I go in here and define a property called count, initialize that to 0. Okay. And then I can go to my template, count is, like that, hit refresh, count is 0. Okay, so is that really working? Is that magic? What's going on? Well, if I go back to here and update it to whatever, 35, refresh, 35. So it's able to pick up my instance variables from my component class. In fact, I wonder if I can split. Oops. I can split these. Split my editor here so you can see both at the same time. Perfect. So now you can see both at the same time. So this instance property defined in my class gets automatically referenced in the view template. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. So with that being said, we can now start interacting. Livewire gives us some cool interactions with this. So what I want to do is I want to be able to increment and decrement this count. And so what do? Well, first I need to write the domain methods to interact with this. And so quite simply, it's just an increment and a decrement function. So I'm going to create an increment function, which, again, this is just straight up object-oriented code now. So we're going to increment, and then I'm going to create another one called decrement. Right? If you didn't know any better, you wouldn't even know this was a Livewire code, right? This is just regular object-oriented code. And so with these functions created, we can now come over here and write some HTML to interact with it. And so I'm going to create a button. And it's going to be a plus sign. And Livewire has these built-in event handlers that look like this. So wire on click. What do you want to do on click? Well, on click, I want to call the increment function. Oops. We'll display the count in here, and then we'll create another button for decrement. All right, so let's take a look at this real quick. So this wire click, like where in the heck did that come from? Well, again, like I said, that came from Livewire. And so there's some built-in handlers like wire click, wire submit. You know, there's different events that a user does that Livewire can handle for us that we just embed right onto our HTML elements. And so what that does, again, it's communicating with the class. So increment, it says, well, where do I look for increment? Look inside your class here and find a function called increment. Now, if it's not there, you're going to get an error, right? You're going to get an error. But since they are there, it'll gladly call those functions for us. And so let's try this out. So we have a plus. Oh, I didn't change my symbols here. Minus. Okay, that looks better. So we have a plus and a minus. Bump that up. So if I hit the plus, boom, look at that. My count is automatic, my state is automatically getting updated. And all I've written is just a couple lines of PHP and some HTML to wire it up to actually interact with it. Okay, that's really cool and super powerful. And so let me show you what happens when we call something that doesn't exist. So increment spelled incorrectly. Yeah, nothing's happening. In fact, now I'm getting an error. You know, method not found. So that's just, you know, again, be careful if you're seeing that. You probably have a typo somewhere. So the next thing we want to do now is start interacting with this a little bit more. So we want another component in here. So I'm going to separate this out into another, let's see. I'm going to have another thing we interacted with called a message. So I'm going to add another instance property called message. Like that. And we'll show what that looks like over here. Okay, so we have the hello message being displayed from the message here. So again, I can update that because it's bound to that variable. Hello world, save that, refresh, so hello world. So now we can do what's called two-way data binding by creating an input element and typing and having the value updated automatically as we type. So let's go ahead and do that. And so we can create an input element and we can wire that up using wire model. And so wire model says, okay, where's your data being modeled from? Well, we're just simply using the message variable to model that for us. Okay. And so what that will do is basically bind with that value and display that in your element. So let me refresh and notice I have this input element with the value there. And then if I update it here, notice it's updating over there as well. Now let me, I guess, separate those so it's not so crazy here, but I can delete it and, you know, a new value is being observed. So it's watching what I'm doing and it's actually updating the value in real time. So this is really, really powerful. So that's called two-way data binding. And another thing I think it's going to be cool that we should be able to leverage this for is like maybe a search engine or some sort of search functionality built into our application. So it'll be nice to be able to track this in the query string. In fact, if you do like a Google search, it'll track your variables in the query string. Or if you do like a YouTube share video, it'll track where in the timeline, at what second in the timeline in the query string. So I think in order to enable some of that, we can do that as well. And so there's this functionality built into Livewire that if we use this variable, this is built in, called updates query string. That's built into Livewire. This is something I didn't make up. So it's very particular about what it's called. And so we wanted to observe that anytime message is updated, go ahead and update the query string. So let's go check that out. So refresh, hello world, and notice the query string up at the top. Okay, query string is being updated right here up here. Isn't that cool? And so if I hit refresh, notice we do lose it though. So we also want to keep track of that. So let's get back to that in a second. But also let's keep in mind, if I go and delete everything, it's left with this message equals nothing. So that kind of looks ugly too. So there's a couple things I want to clean up with that. And so Livewire gives us a functionality to track the message in the query string, except when it's an empty string. So that's basically what that means. Track message except when it's an empty string. So I'm going to go back here. I'm also going to take this default out of here, off a message. Hit refresh so that when I start typing, message goes here. And if I delete it all, the whole query string goes away. So that cleans up, when it's empty, don't track it in the query string. Take it out. So that cleans that up. And so the next thing I want to clean up is that if I do have something added up there, so message equals goodbye, and let's say you copied that, went to a new tab and pasted it, notice I don't get this populated with message equals goodbye. Like, that doesn't help you much at all. So what I want to do now is I want to be able to preserve that. And so in order to preserve that, we need to leverage what's called a mount function. And the mount function looks like this. It's just a regular function, but Livewire actually looks for it when the component gets initialized. The mount function is called first. And so what I want to do is I want to assign to message from the request. So this is built into PHP query. We want to look for message in the query string and do an update there. So we want to look for message in the query string and populate the message variable when the component is initialized. So let's take a look at that. So I want to hit refresh. And so now I can change this again. Is this preserved? Well, let's copy this URL, open a new tab, paste it, and it's preserved. So it pulled it from the query string, populated our message variable, and then it's bound to the input. So that's going to be super powerful when we get to a point, like if we ever want to build like a search engine and populate it from the query string. That's going to be super cool. So I guess in review, as I wrap up this particular lecture playing around with LiveView, is any instance variable that we define on our component class, we can display and bind to over in our view. So we can display it, or we can have two-way model data binding is what it's called via wire model. So anything we type in this will get reflected back to the value. Updates query string is a special built-in Livewire variable that will update the query string for us automatically. Mount is basically like a constructor of this class where it'll get called first, and we can do any functionality we want in here to update variables, kick off processes, do some things there. And then we can also have these other functions that allow us to handle events that we want to do when a user clicks or selects or drags or mouse over. We have a lot of those built-in handlers that we can do. And then finally, we have this render, which says, just let me know which template you want me to interact with and I'll do it. So cool. Well, I hope that was helpful. This was just like a playground example. In our next lecture, we'll actually incorporate this into our Friends application and have it give us some interaction. So until then, see you next time.